Good evening. Great to have so many people with us tonight. We'll be starting here momentarily. Just welcome everybody into our virtual meeting room. Please come in. And before we officially start, just a quick note to go check out the AAPS website, aapsonline.org. There's a number of new articles posted this week on a number of very interesting topics. So head over there after the webinar tonight and check things out. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and officially start here. Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar hosted by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. My name is Jeremy Snavely and I'm the business manager for AAPS. We're grateful to have you all with us for this event. Just a few brief housekeeping items. First off, because we are offering 1.5 hours of CME credit, we need to let you know that the organizers did not disclose a relevant financial interest related to this presentation, and that the presenter has an ownership interest in the Caris Group and Sedera. And as always, claiming your CME credit will require filling out a post-event survey that we will email to everyone after we adjourn. Please be thinking of your questions. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion following the presentation. And if you'd like to submit your question, you can use the Q&A button located in the toolbar. Or if you'd like to verbally ask your question, please click the raise your hand button. So with that, let's get started. I'll go ahead and turn the webinar over to longtime AAPS member and board member, Dr. Robert Emmons. Dr. Emmons, thank you as always for your invaluable help leading our Doctors Are In webinar series. Dr. Emmons.
Thank you, Jeremy. Welcome to all participants tonight. It's great to see old friends and new. Thanks as always to Jeremy for your stout work organizing the logistics of the webinar and actually the content, a lot of the content too. And this is number 12 in our webinar series, The Doctors Are In. And we organized this webinar series around the time that lockdowns were making it hard for physicians to get together in person. And we really believe that now it's important for colleagues to be talking to colleagues. We're clinicians, and we really need to be leading the way. We need to be evaluating the science, and we need to be bringing that to our patients. I'm honored to welcome to introduce our guest, Dr. Tony Dale. Dr. Dale is trained in family medicine in Britain in the 60s, and he immigrated to the United States in the 80s. He's currently in Austin, Texas. He's going to be talking to us about entrepreneurship in the life of the physician, and he told me that he'll be emphasizing the courage to start. And just a couple of things about his accomplishments. He founded the Caris Group, which is a medical bill mediation and negotiating company. And his experience in that field has given him it gave him a chance to see a lot of the workings of the American medical financing system. And he also is a principal in Sedera Health, which is designed to offer a new economic model for companies to handle staff healthcare costs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tony.
Well, Dr. Emmons, thank you so much for your kind introduction. I find myself thinking that I must be about the least likely person to be giving a talk here in the States to the American Association, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. I couldn't have imagined this in the life of the British family doctor, which is what I was for all of my early shall we say, adult years. But it's a great privilege to be here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to this time. Yes, our subject is entrepreneurship in the life of the physician amid the rapid advances in the free market medical movement. Somehow a British family doctor does not seem like the sort of person who's likely to be an entrepreneur. I trained in London in the late 60s and early 70s, trained at Bart's Hospital, right in the heart of downtown London, well within reach and sight of St. Paul's Cathedral, for any of you who've been to London. I love mentioning in this type of context that Bart's as a hospital was established in 1123. So it sort of puts history into a slightly different context, perhaps for many of us on this call. One of my favorite memories is that every day going in through the Henry VIII gate, literally designed and built by Henry VIII, you know, the famous one of 6 wives. And it's a remarkable place with a great history. And it was a wonderful place to train. I have so many happy memories of that time. But after my training, I'd really come to the clear decision that I wanted to move into family practice. I come from a family of general practitioners, family doctors, whatever the language would be. My father was a family physician. His father before him was a family physician. And for me, it felt very natural. Some of my earliest memories are, you know, going with my dad in, you know, in the evening or at night out on house calls. And loving watching his relationship with the patients. And, you know, the patients represented every sort of strata of society. We'd I spent most of my early years in Taiwan, where my dad, although as a British physician, had gone out there to work in a sort of cross between missions work and, you know, direct medical work. And I might find myself visiting the British ambassador in his home, which was an old castle on the coast, an amazing place. Or I might find myself going into the poorest of the slums in Taipei, as it was in those days. And, you know, the contrast of the lifestyles of the people that were being served was amazing. But the consistency of what I saw in the way that my dad cared for the patient really has shaped me in every part of my professional life. So for me, it wasn't that strange a choice that after medical school and, you know, the requisite years in hospital sort of medicine to really give one the experience you needed of the clinical cases, I found myself moving into family practice in the East End of London. Now, the East End of London, Tower Hamlets specifically where I was generally known, and not necessarily affectionately, as the dustbin or the trash can of London. It's where people went really when they had nowhere further to drop in terms of society. You'd get some sense of government involvement in a socialist system in a country which in those days was very socialist in its orientation. If I say to you that 92% of the housing in that area was government housing. And so into this area, I found myself, you know, bursting with enthusiasm and with, you know, all the recently acquired knowledge, trying to figure out how I could best serve the patients that had essentially been assigned to me. They had a very limited choice, but the reality is 99% of the patients were in the practice they were assigned to and never made any attempt to change. If any of you have watched the PBS television program, Call a Midwife, that's right in the area that I was working, just streets away from where the various medical practices I worked in were based. And the social sort of deprivation of the area is very accurately portrayed in that PBS, or actually I think it's a BBC series that the PBS over here shows, of Call the Midwife. It brings back many, many happy memories. But many of those memories are rather marred by the pressures that that system puts on one. And so although I loved the people, I loved the area, I loved the work that I was doing, even then I did not love the system. And you know, the truth is, I probably went into that work somewhat neutral, if you like, in political views and economic views. But there was something about living in the heart of an area that actually for the 70 years prior to when I had been there, had only been represented in Parliament by either socialists in Britain, that would be called the Labour Party, or there was a brief period in the 1920s when it had been represented by the communists. So that gives you some idea of the political persuasion and the impact, if you like, of an area that's had nothing but sort of 60, 70 years of the so-called benevolence of socialism. And what I saw absolutely persuaded me that when you treat people generation after generation in a way that says that their utter dependence is upon the government, government itself becomes the primary cause of poverty within that environment. And what I saw was a society where, oh, just the most delightful people, but with little incentive to think that there was any possibility of moving out of the context or situation they saw themselves in. I mean, to give you one example, the neighboring borough, one year a borough being sort of a district, a bit like saying the Bronx in New York or something like that. The neighboring borough, 2 hours of Tower Hamlets, in one of the years that I was there practicing, did not have one student in the whole borough go on from high school into any form of higher education. And that was such a waste of the human potential that was there. And I found myself thinking there had to be better ways. And I really began digging into both the economics of what was going on in the medical system, which we had no training in because we were all just wards of the state. Essentially, I was hired by the NHS and really had very little that I could do that would have any impact on money. But what I did see was that the lack of any involvement on the financial side between the family doctor and his patient led to a very strange relationship between the doctor and patient. Because where there is no exchange of financial value, there tends to be little exchange of the mutual respect that is really at the heart of the doctor-patient relationship. And I realized that because the patients all viewed me as getting me for free, that they thought nothing of using or abusing my time. There was very little appreciation for, you know, the endless amount of hard work that was involved in trying to take care of them really well. And in looking at different practices in our part of London, I saw there was enormous variation in the quality of the practices, basically based on whether the doctor had sort of given up on feeling that he could do good medicine anymore, or whether he had lost interest in the people, because without the economic exchange of value, you tend not to have the mutual respect and appreciation of each other, which is actually such a valuable component of the physician-patient relationship. And so with all of that stuff going on in the background, I was also very involved at the time in a sort of an academic side of things where I was working with physicians all over the country, basically in exploring the ideas of how you really treat the whole patient. And it was out of that that I found myself moving to the United States in 1987. And I didn't move here to practice clinical medicine. I moved here to continue working with physicians in this sort of quasi-academic role, and was also doing a lot of travel around the world in spreading very similar ideas about what it looks like to work with the whole person and not just be narrowly focused on whatever the presenting symptom might have been. And into that, I found myself falling into business by accident. But unfortunately, the accident was to me. I injured my medial meniscus playing basketball with the kids and went to see an orthopedic surgeon who confirmed my own sort of diagnosis. arranged surgery and told me it was going to cost about $2,000 when I asked him. What he didn't know was that I was so ignorant of the system that I thought he was telling me the whole thing would cost $2,000. And actually, he was telling me that was only his part. And so by the time that the bills had all come in after the surgery, and the surgery went absolutely fine, he did a wonderful job. But when the bills came in, my view of what had gone on began to change a little, because I had around $15,000 of bills. This was in 1996. Maybe 35,000 in today's terms. And that was for somewhere where I went into hospital at 6:30 in the morning and was already discharged home by 10:30 that same morning. And I thought, how can all of this money have been spent with me probably, as it were, under the knife for less than half an hour? And that's what got me digging into what's going on in the healthcare system. Now, I've described a few of the challenges in Britain, but of course, all of you on this call, I think, are very, very aware that there are equally challenging situations over here. And so I'm going to just introduce some of that and some of what has begun to shape my thinking with two brief bits that I would like to read for you. From news articles or other types of articles that I've come across just in the last couple of weeks. Okay, one, many of you may have seen this. The headline was, "A doctor went to his own employer for a COVID-19 antibody test. It cost $10,984. Okay, and it goes on to say that, you know, this doctor, he was actually the doctor in charge of the lab, you know, associated with the hospital ER. That was doing these tests. He was just there on a locum tenens basis. So he didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, thought it would be good to experience it for himself. And so just went through their own internal system as an ordinary person. And he was an ordinary person. He wasn't on the hospital insurance scheme because he was a locum. And so he had an individual policy. And as he describes in this article what went on, the thing he said was this. He said, even more surprising than all of this, the insurer paid the bill in full. Okay, now, you know, that's just ludicrous. Let's now contrast that with what a historian, not writing as a historian, but writing as a consumer in a book recently published and reviewed in the New York Review of Books. This is what he had to say about his experience of the complexities, both of the European and the British healthcare system, when he found himself needing it urgently. He said, "We would like to think we have healthcare that incidentally involves some wealth transfer. What we actually have is wealth transfer that incidentally involves some healthcare." Okay, now that is a damning remark at sort of every level, as it identifies so much of what has actually somehow grabbed hold of what I call the system of healthcare over here, as opposed to the physicians or nurses or others who are involved in the system, that all of us, in a sense, have found ourselves involved almost beyond our control in a system which now has got not to something that people would call just greedy, but a system which is systematically stripping the country of wealth, representing 20% of the nation's whole gross national product, but not going into the pockets of, you know, the likes of you and me and others who are out there trying to serve the patient. But the system itself is just found a way to suck all of this money out of the system to enrich the very few. And so that's the context into which I want to share some ideas. And I think the slide will have just changed for you so that you can see what it is that I want to talk about. If you were to look at our vision statement in you know, the primary company that I spend my time with at the moment, it's this. It's to make high quality, human, transparent solutions the new normal in healthcare. Now, I made this slide in 2018. And even then, the way I've diagrammatically shown this is actually grossly inadequate. What I was trying to say was, back in 2018, we would be like a tiny little dot in the middle of the light blue square. So a tiny little dark blue dot, not a square that you could easily see, but just a speck. You would wonder if we were even accomplishing anything. And I think if you look back even 5 years and you try and think in terms of how much impact is free market medical care making in the United States, it's still a very, very small segment of what's going on. But for myself, I was thinking in terms of the area that I was about to tackle, which is how we could transform the way that people pay for really large medical bills rather than the ordinary everyday stuff. We wanted to make that the new normal. Now, normal would be the light blue square at the moment. And my goal is to see things so transformed that one day people will say, my goodness, there's been a complete transformation of how we think about paying for large bills. And I want to say something about the importance of vision. Because in the life of the entrepreneur, if there isn't a clearly defined vision of where you're going, what someone like Jim Collins in some of his writing about business and business management calls the BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal. Something that it's really worth giving your time and your energy and your life and your money, because it's likely to take all of that to get something new and worthwhile off the ground. That's part of the price tag, I think, of really being a visionary or an entrepreneur. It's seeing something and knowing that we can do it better and saying, I'm willing to give myself into that context to see if we can create a new normal in whatever area that may be. Now, in understanding how a new normal can develop, it's important to understand that it takes time. And so that's really what I'm showing here in this next graph. Now, the absolute numbers don't really matter particularly. The important thing is to understand the nature of transformational growth. What you're seeing here would be over a relatively short period of time, a visual presentation of what happens when you look at the power of multiplication. Perhaps the easiest way to describe this would be if I tell you an ancient fable. It's said that there was an ancient Indian emperor, and he was a very wise and extremely wealthy king, and was one of the early people to discover chess and to discover the blessings and joys and challenges of a game like chess. And so he put out the word in his kingdom that anybody who would be willing to challenge him and who could beat him at a game of chess, he would give them, as it were, a king's ransom. And a very poor man came in and rose to the challenge in what potentially is a very dangerous situation. You know, how does a very poor man in ancient India challenge the king at anything? But the poor man was willing to take the risk. And they play their chess match, and the poor man wins. And so the king says to him, well, I promised you a king's ransom. And he says, I know you're very poor. He says, I want to give you a riddle, and you can choose whichever of these answers you want, and it will be your prize for having beaten me in chess. He said, look, on our chessboard, there's 64 squares. If I give you one large sack of rice for every square on this board, in other words, 64 large sacks of rice, maybe it'll take 64 cattle to carry each one to carry one sack back to your home, and you'll have this huge amount of rice that you can use and you can sell or do whatever you want with. So he said, I'd be willing to offer you that, or I'd be willing to offer you 1 grain of rice on square number 1, 2 grains on square number 2, 4 grains on square number 3, 8 grains on square number 4, and so I'll keep doubling it giving you that number of grains until we have got to square 64. Which would you want to take? The poor man said without hesitation, no, I'll take the 1 grain that doubles. Okay, this chart here is a chart of our growth in Sedera over the first 5 years of our growth. So anything after 01 of 2020 is conjecture. I can't give you those numbers yet. Okay, and what you see is the blue line is so small in 2015, 2016, 2017, and we weren't doubling, we were tripling. 2018, tripling again. 2019, maybe growth by 2.5 times. Okay, you can be multiplying, but it takes time before anything you do begins to hit a significant size. And that really is the life of the entrepreneur. If you're looking for something quick and simple and straightforward, any, let's call it get rich quick scheme, the likelihood of that working is almost negligible. But if you're prepared to do something that you believe will be great and will lay the foundations for something that can double and double and double and double and double, okay, into that context, over time, what you begin to see is an exponential curve. There's something incredibly powerful here. I mean, Moore's law that most of you will hear of, the sort of, excuse me, the principle within computing that they're doubling computing power and halving the cost of that power is what the free market has driven for the last 50 years. And the truth is, even before that, if you looked at the growth of knowledge, it had been going on for 50 years before that, but it was all, as it were, going on almost under the surface. There's extraordinary power in what can happen in exponential terms. And a visionary or an entrepreneur who has a vision that has really gripped their imagination can accomplish something really dramatic. Now, I happen to come from a faith background. And so I'm giving you here a verse that's well known from out of the Bible and was actually the title of one of the earliest of the motivational books, a book written back almost 100 years ago, or a little bit more than 100 years ago at this point, by an Englishman called As a Man Thinketh. And the concept here is our thinking shapes what we become. Okay, in the East End of London, as I described to you, a generation of people brought up on socialist thinking and thinking it was the only thing possible and that really the only way of life that they knew was government handouts of one sort or another and living off that sort of government teat, so to speak. If you think you can't do it, you end up that you can't do it. I think it was Henry Ford who said that. You know, if you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, you can't. There's something incredibly powerful about the way we think. I had this concept back in 2014 that what I'd seen in a small segment of the world that I was helping in terms of medical cost containment, there were some Christian cooperative type movements, those known as healthcare sharing ministries, where they were taking a sort of principle that they had pulled out of the New Testament, where it talks about the fact that there were no needs among the early Christians because whenever any had needs, they shared. And some people began saying, you know, this isn't just the Amish doing a barn raising. We could apply this same principle to healthcare costs. And they began starting these Christian cooperative movements where they literally on a voluntary basis, but in a highly organized way, began sharing each other's medical bills. And I'd helped them because I'd seen what they were doing. I'd realized that they were paying these excessively large costs. And I volunteered to step in and help them learn how to negotiate their bills. And that turned into, I hadn't expected it to, but it turned into the first company I started. And we ended up negotiating hundreds of millions of dollars of bills on their behalf, and then doing similar things for the insurance industry, and particularly in sort of limited medical benefit plans where people had large out-of-pocket costs. And we found all sorts of ways to help people find better ways to handle their medical bills. I like to say that where people ran out of benefit, we could show them a way that we could bring those costs under control. And so that was as far as the vision went in those days. But when the Affordable Care Act came in, I found myself aggrieved, I think, at all sorts of levels. First of all, I knew that the Affordable Care Act was clearly a move towards a single payer system. It wasn't that different from Hillary Care as proposed, you know, back in the 90s. Of course, I'd lived through this in England and experienced it. And I knew that inevitably the medical system would become over here, just like it is in England, a bottomless pit of people wanting more, because when people think that something is available to them for free, then they want as much of it as they can get. And so you never get to the bottom of the medical needs that people have. But I looked at it and I saw that in the Affordable Care Act, they had exempted these Christian groups and said, well, you may not have insurance, but what you have is adequate, but there are to be no more of these groups. Even any people who join your existing co-ops, they have to sign your statement of faith. And so this is going to be limited in that way. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, why would government take something that's actually working really well for these groups and limit it? But I also thought on the flip side of this, why would the Christian groups themselves be asking for an exemption that stopped anyone else from getting involved? And why would they only take something good like this, which is working, and have it available for the Christian community? Why wouldn't they have it available for everybody? So for me, as the sort of person who likes to think in the big picture, I began thinking through this whole area of what would be possible if this basic methodology could be brought into the mainstream. And of course, by then, the sharing economy was really beginning to grow and to catch root. You know, things like Airbnb and HomeAway, where people were sharing their homes, the place they lived. And then, you know, someone, comes up with, why couldn't we do the same with a car? And Uber and Lyft are birthed as it is. And all of a sudden, people haven't just taken an incremental step in improving a system, but they've completely transformed the whole idea of where a person can stay when they happen to be traveling, or how a person can get from A to B if they need to get across town. Now, that part of the sharing economy is sharing people's assets. What I began to understand and think through is, why don't we teach people how to share a liability they have? A liability would be a medical need. It's a big bill at a time that a person is not perhaps adequately able out of their cash flow to handle that bill. But how about if we brought together people the same way that the sharing community does and said, hey, we're going to commit that while we're healthy and well, which is being an asset, and therefore have money available, which at the moment we're sort of squandering on a very expensive system. But if instead we pulled ourselves sort of out of that system and said, I'm not going to spend all that money through a system that, uses all sorts of middlemen and other things that are going on that corrupts the system. But instead, I'm going to share that with other people who right now have a liability, i.e. their medical need. And so we'll just share month by month. And with enough people, we'll know exactly what it is we need to share. We'll share exactly the same amount every month. And we'll organize how we take care of those medical needs. And that is how Sedera was birthed. Okay, it was something that began, I guess, in my head, but it was shaped by what was in my heart, believing that basically most people out there are people of goodwill who, if they say that they're going to share, will share. And that's been exactly our experience. I would say that 99% of everybody within the sharing community that Sedera represents, do pay their monthly share every month. And part of that is because of the way we've set it up, where we're working with companies and it's easily, just taken out of what the company is willing to contribute and what the employee is willing to contribute. And so everybody knows in a system that's easily workable that what they're sharing now has a way of coming back to them at the time when they have the medical need. And I can say, and I'm very grateful for this, that in the 6 years that Sedera has been running and in the millions and millions of dollars that we've shared, that every medical need has been handled. So when there's a vision in your mind of what can be done, it is amazing how the mind sort of begins to put the pieces together. Now, if you find a different language to the sort of as a man thinketh, perhaps helpful, if you were looking at these same concepts as they're now described by places like Singularity University out in Silicon Valley, and the sort of Elon Musks of this world and others who are stretching people's thinking to say, the world has massive problems. What we need is people of vision who have an MTP. That's a massively transformational purpose. And we have that within the medical world. There is emerging across the whole of the medical system, these, particularly in the free market ecosystem, people who are saying we can transform our part of the system. Today, I was talking earlier this morning with a lovely, by my standard, I guess, young physician, although I know because she mentioned she's got a child in college, she, almost certainly in her 40s or something, but, here's a young physician who has said, in my area of urgent care, we could do something that would just make it so much easier for people to understand that they don't have to go to an emergency room. For 1/10 of that cost, we can handle nearly everything that is going on that people currently use the emergency room for. And she's built that. Now there's 16 clinics of the next level urgent care system, across Houston, touching hundreds of thousands of people. This is a massively transformational purpose. I mean, I'm thinking of Houston, so my mind naturally goes to Dr. Kristen Dickerson. A leading radiologist, at one point CEO of the largest multi-specialty clinic in Houston. But now with green imaging, it has brought the cost of radiology, of MRIs and CAT scans and ultrasounds and you name it, within the reach of anybody. Because in our day and age where the Affordable Care Act, my goodness, what an Orwellian description by anyone's definition of something that has put even the deductibles out of most people's range. How can a person who has a high deductible of $5,000 when they're probably only about 10% of the country who have $5,000 in a bank, that leaves 90% of the country functionally uninsured. And so a system that claims to give people coverage, but actually leaves them functionally uninsured, that means if that person is inadvertently sent by their doctor for an MRI and they go on the wrong side of the street and they get their MRI done at a hospital, they have a bill for maybe $3,500 when it could have been done on the other side of the street for $350. There's actually something immoral about that being the way the system is run, with the vast majority of people completely ignorant of it. And people like Dr. Dickerson are getting in there and saying, I can change that. I can make something available where people know that there is a fair and transparent pricing. And there are movements like this that are transforming the medical world. And I guess my encouragement to all of you who've had the kindness to give an hour of your evening to share with me tonight, I would love to encourage you, be bold, be strong. It may seem like an impossible dream. It may take you back to that first slide I showed of 3 squares where the dark blue was growing. You may feel, oh, but my dot won't even be noticed. Well, it may not be for the first year or two, but what can it become? And my challenge to all of us is that we would rise up to the opportunities that are presented, and we would say to ourselves and to everyone around us, the need out there is so great, I have to become a part of the answer rather than just a part of the problem. So thank you very much to listen to me trying to explain a little bit of my entrepreneurial journey. I'm certainly open to any questions and would like to hand back, I think, at this point to Dr. Emmons.
Thank you, Dr. Dale, so very much for sharing your knowledge with us tonight and the encouragement as well. Very much needed and appreciated. So, all right, we'll open up the floor to discussion and questions. I know we have I can see we have a number of physicians on with us tonight who are doing their own innovative, entrepreneurial and innovative, implementing their own entrepreneurial and innovative ideas to help patients access care at a lower price and higher quality without the middleman. So thanks to all of you for joining us. So please, if you have a question, please raise your hand, or would like to start a discussion, please raise your hand. We have some questions in the Q&A box here. So one of the questions in the Q&A box is this is an interesting one. So a Christian healthcare sharing ministry generally asks enrollees, that's not the right word, I guess, enrollees isn't really the right word for healthcare sharing, but asks members to say no to drugs and sex outside of marriage and other moral hazards. How does a non-Christian or secular, non-religious healthcare sharing arrangement handle these things? Do they have, Dr. Dale, do you know, do they have similar rules?
Yes, I do know. And of course, those issues were issues that I was very aware of, having been involved in helping negotiate on behalf of the Christian Ministries. And to me, it was really important that every patient feel like they were valued. Probably shouldn't call them patients necessarily. They don't become that until there's something gone wrong. That every consumer who wanted to be a part of the community just understands the basic economics and philosophical foundation of what we're doing. And we're very open that if someone is going to join a community of people who are going to share each other's medical costs, and then there are some foundational things that people need to understand that come as responsibilities along with that privilege. I would say the first is we choose to take care of ourselves because we're joining a community of people who are choosing to be healthy. So we don't have, whatever weight guidelines or any of those type of restrictions. I think the only specific thing that we say is that if people still haven't been able to give up smoking, we would like to help get them on a path towards giving up. But until they've given up, we're going to ask them to share more because everybody knows that if they're a smoker, they cost more in terms of the healthcare dollars that are needed. So we explain that there's personal responsibility. We also explain that there's community responsibility, not only from the community to me as an individual when I need help, but from me as an individual to the community when I need help, that I'm going to choose as a part of the community that I want to make sure that I, accept the help that I need to navigate through a complex system so that I'm not squandering the resources of the community. So we have certain simple sorts of guidelines, like, if you need non-emergency surgery, then you need to get a second opinion, and we're going to help you do that. So it's going to be done for free for you. And we contract with one of the second opinion services. We encourage people in their use of telemedicine because it's such a wonderful resource nowadays. We We point people towards, practices of the sort that perhaps some on this call are on. So no, we don't try to dictate to people exactly how they're going to handle, if you like, the moral issues. But we do point out that our choices have economic costs and that we therefore have personal responsibility and community responsibility.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for that explanation. And I had a question, or I was wondering if you would expand briefly on how you work with employers, because the way I understand it, employers come to you and you're able to help them help their employees. So am I right that, so if there's employers who, instead of signing up with a traditional third-party payer like, Blue Cross, United, Aetna, and Cigna, would come to you, and you can help employers help their employees find options that work better for them. Am I right about that?
Yes, what you're describing is accurate as far as it goes. Now, they wouldn't sign up with us instead of. We value the insurance companies. They have a role to play. And in the current system, and especially under current law, it's very important that people have choices. To be honest, it's important that people have choices anyway. I don't think that the employer is necessarily the best person to make that decision for the employee any more than the government is. And so I highly value something where we're bringing the choice back to the individual. Now, when we work with companies, we always work in an environment where they're going to be working with their employees in a way that gives their employees choices. And the employees can see those choices, which will include insurance choices, and they'll see the costs involved, and they'll see what their responsibilities are based on the choices that they make. So absolutely, we want to work with employers who are ready to include their employees. And in that context, we're now working with over 1,000 employers, all over the country, of every sort of size, to show them how they can make these choices available to their employees, and how the employees who choose to live healthy lifestyles and to be a part of a sharing community not only end up getting taken care of, as well as their friends and colleagues who have insurance programs, and nothing wrong with people having those programs, but they get taken care of as well as those people at a fraction of the cost. And the employee is usually able to keep a significant part of that cost differential in their pocket, because the deductibles are the whole approach. We don't use deductibles in that sense, but the whole approach is so different. Their out-of-pocket costs are dramatically reduced. And if the employer has perhaps been paying, let's say the employer's been paying 50% for them and they've been paying 50%. Now in that context, if both parties are paying something at, a 40 or 50% saving, both parties have also made a significant saving on that monthly cost or share that, as we describe it. So yeah, they're benefits to all concerned.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Okay, we got a few hands here. So we're going to go to the first hand here. Dr. Crayco. Dr. Crayco, I'm going to bring you on, and you may have to confirm on your end that that you're being unmuted. Dr. Crayco, please go ahead. Thanks for joining us.
Dr. Dale, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate listening to you. I'm a sleep doctor, and I'm developing a model that I call, for lack of a better term right now, advanced coaching. But I really want to get your opinion in terms of the long-term picture, if you have an opinion on this idea. And that is, I'm very concerned that with the way things are moving with health information on the internet in particular, not to mention any other resources that will be evolving, like apps and so forth, I really see the model of healthcare changing dramatically to something that almost looks egalitarian or peer-to-peer, in that doctors are not really going to function as the wise or sagely individual who is handing down wisdom from on high, which, I'm not in any way suggesting that that was a pejorative statement, that there's always been a time where some people know a lot more and they can help a lot of people by knowing a lot more. But now I'm beginning to see in my field, in particular sleep medicine, where there's so many things. I don't need to treat a patient. I need to educate the heck out of them so they understand all the different kinds of PAP therapy, all the different ways to deal with insomnia and nightmares. And so I'm seeing, and I've already started this project, and I've already seen about 20 patients over the last year, where they are being educated to a level. And what's fascinating is all of them are telling me they've never heard any of this stuff from the sleep centers they went to. So I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? I mean, if a sleep doctor isn't even going to educate a person, what are they getting paid for? Because once somebody is educated about a certain type of PAP machine or a certain type of sleep apnea, again, a certain type of insomnia, they can go out and start working on that themselves. Not to say that they don't have to get prescriptions for different things, but I just want to get your general opinion on this idea of, shouldn't doctors be developing more advanced coaching strategies, whether they're doing it themselves, whether they're hiring people to train to do it? It just seems like that's very different. And what I like about it in particular is it's outside of the model of health insurance. It's in the model of health education.
Well, I love what you've described. And, one of the luxuries we have when we brought value to the transaction by the patient actually engaging in the transfer of finances as a part of the process is that the patient is much more likely to listen to us than they are in a context where, they go to the specialist, whatever, the sleep specialist in this case, but they don't necessarily see or feel any of the economic impact of that involvement. When people have skin in the game, they tend to pay much more attention. So you're describing a context, and of which there would be many across every field of medicine, especially anything to do with chronic illness, of which sleeping problems would really fit within that category, where often the coaching is not just a component, but it's the most important component of what's going on. And what I love is that there are really imaginative approaches that are now being developed to bring this type of coaching, not even just on the individual doctor to patient level, but where doctors are perhaps facilitating groups of people who suffer from the same problem, who need an opportunity to understand that what they have is not only unique to them, but there are many others who have it, and that some of the approaches towards cure, can be learned within a group context. So people then start coming up. The free market has a way of pushing to the surface all sorts of ideas where we begin to see what works and how to deliver the type of service that you're providing, not just to the small group of people that you're able to deal with, but how to deliver it to ever increasing numbers of people, I think is one of the challenges that we all need to rise to within whichever part of the profession we're currently serving.
Jeremy, can I get a follow-up question real quick?
Please go ahead.
So Dr. Dale, thank you very much for that input. My big question that I've had for the last several years in developing this is, do you see any liability issues that really need to be looked at quickly to head off at the pass, so to speak? Because this is an area where I've spoken to a lot of different doctors on medical boards. I've spoken to lawyers, and I get such a mix of opinion about this. Like, well, what do you mean coaching? How do you know you're not treating the patient? I mean, I'm just curious if you have an opinion on that.
Well, maybe my opinion is shaped by the fact that I'm a British physician who moved over here. in America, perhaps the most litigious society on earth,
Yeah.
there's always liability. I think part of the role of the visionary or entrepreneur is to say, well, yes, there will be challenges, but there are better ways for us to deliver our medical care. And so let's look for what those ways are. And if they're demonstrably better, then the liability clearly is reduced. Let me give you an example from the area I'm involved in. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges with the regulators. We're trying as best we know how to do everything, open and above board. And, when regulators reach out to us, which they do on a consistent basis, we willingly engage with them and actively provide them any information that they want. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That's just part of the price for trying to transform the system. You see, what needs to be done, I think, from my point of view, is not just incremental change. Something like the Affordable Care Act, as drastic and as, from my perspective, as ill-conceived as it was, is really just tweaking the system. It just took the elements of the system and it said, we need more government, we need more insurance. That's not going to change anything in the long run. I'm talking about transformation. And in transformation, the thinking that led us into a problem, according to Einstein, supposedly, is never going to be of the caliber that is able to lead us out of the problem. You need a different, not a better than. And so we need to look at these problems of what are we doing that can transform things? And I would hope to encourage a different rather than just a better than approach.
Thank you for this great discussion, everybody. Okay, we'll go to the Q&A box here. There's a couple of similar questions here about pre-existing conditions. For instance, Dr. Dale, we have someone asking if you might speak to the issue of pre-existing medical conditions when working with employers and whether the premiums, there are differentials in the premiums charged based on pre-existing conditions, or if they're ever excluded from participating in these types of arrangements.
Okay, well, let's start with the final part of that question. I'll bring it back so that we handle the whole thing. You asked if we have any differentials. No, we don't. In our pricing all over the country, we just have, in our, what we do with employers, we just have two groups. We have people 29 and down and people 30 and up. So we don't do any underwriting of any sort, whether on the group or on the individual level. Okay, but that doesn't specifically answer the question of pre-existing, and that really deserves a full and complete answer. I think we have to start with a basic understanding of economics, and then based on that, we have to decide where does responsibility lie as we try and deal with these issues. Okay, a basic understanding of economics says that I'm not aware of any property and casualty company in the country, in the world, which says you can come to me after your house is burned down to have us pay for the cost of your house being burned down. That's so economically obvious that we all know that. Okay, so we have to start from there, which is to say, from the world of economics, there is clearly no economic answer that becomes the panacea to deal with all pre-ex. So we have to start from a different world, okay? Now, here in the United States, arguably the wealthiest nation on earth, there are going to be different views and opinions, but I would be one of the opinion that we do need something that takes care of pre-existing conditions. So I actually appreciate the fact that President Trump has been making it very clear recently that under what he's proposing, and in fact, I think it was actually a part of an executive order that he did stated recently, that it is the policy of the United States that pre-existing conditions will be taken care of. So if we start from saying it needs to be taken care of, rather than sort of the mudslinging, I think that's a healthy place to start with. And in that context, we can then look at a whole variety of ways of dealing with it. So let me make a few comments to start with. Even the term pre-existing is something almost slanderous, if that's the right word, because it conjures up something which so often is only true because of poor policy that's there in the first place. The lack of portability of health insurance. You know, the fact that you lose your job and you decide to go to a different, or you just want to go to another job, could make any condition you have now a pre-existing condition. But it wasn't pre-existing, they had insurance. Clearly, you know, there are simple policy things that could be done that would make it possible for people to take insurance with them. And those things need to be done. But in a context of, let's call it true pre-existing, and if you study state risk pools around the country before the ACA, they were actually incredibly small. You know, compared to the population of the state, they were tiny because there were so few people who really had something that's truly pre-existing. But accepting that there are some that need that, we need a societal answer. And the societal answer is not that you handle it in the insurance system, you handle it within the context of a society that says, we're going to take on board what used to be called state risk pools. Now maybe we would call them pre-existing condition pools, where, you know, as a society, we say, I'm happy to pay a little bit of extra tax so that people who really have pre-existing conditions can be taken care of. And that would just be one way of dealing with it. So in our context, yeah, we have some sound economic principles upon which we work with people, and it's all very, very clearly written in our guidelines so that everybody knows exactly where they stand and how they can fit in, however they come to us, and what steps will need to be taken so that they can be a part of our community.
Thank you very much for explaining that. Okay, we'll go back to a verbal question here. Dr. Wubker, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm going to unmute you and you'll have to confirm on your end that you're being unmuted. Dr. Wubker, please go ahead. Are you there, Dr. Wubker? All right, we'll come back to you here in a minute. In the meantime, we have quite a number of questions here in the Q&A box. And one of them is wondering if you could give an idea of the range of sharing amounts that are shared. And are there any restrictions on what is shared?
Yeah, in terms of range, we share, and anybody who joins with us, we want them to have skin in the game in every context that they're in. So instead of there being the sort of classic deductible concept, we work with the concept of an initial unshareable amount. We say the really small stuff, you know, like an oil change for a car, plan for the small stuff because we know it's going to happen to us. It happens to all of us. And so most people who come to us through companies, they work with an initial unshareable amount of $500. And so they're saying, yeah, if something happens and it's less than $500, I'm going to pay out of pocket. But anything over the $500 will then be shared with the community. You know, let's take anything from 500 up. You know, whether the extra is $100 or whether it's $1 million, we share it. And we're happy to do that. We don't have any ceiling, and the only floor there is that we want them to have had some skin in the game so that they're being a responsible consumer. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I guess, so a follow-up to that was, could someone go and see the details of what's offered and how it works on your website? I imagine that's at sedera.com.
That is correct. Absolutely. Anybody can go there. They can read the guidelines that the community orders itself on. They can see the pricing. So yeah, you can get all the basics, and you know, anytime anyone can reach out to the team there.
Thank you. And so then there's another question that maybe ties in here to this: direct primary care. And does Sedera couple with direct primary care practices at all, or do you have any other thoughts about how DPC practices can work with you or other types of insurance?
Yes, you know, direct primary care or even direct patient care, you know, because there are many specialists now who are moving towards the DPC approach. We think is a marvelous, transparent approach of really giving the best to the patient. So we love it. And we know that wherever people have a clear, I guess the PC term would be, you know, sort of a medical home. You know, apart from someone like me who's born into a doctor's house, I'm not sure anybody actually wants a medical home. But, you know, in the sense that we have a home base medically where we know someone who knows us. They know us by name. They're engaged with us. They know our history. They're concerned about us. We value them. They value us. We know that leads to better medical care. And so we not only have relationships with DPC practices all over the country, we actually reduce the cost of the sharing to the community for someone who belongs to a DPC practice, because we know they end up costing the community less.
Very good, very good. So there's another question that is a step beyond that. What about specialists that want to work with you or your patients, or patients that, you know, are members of Sedera? How would a doctor, I guess, find your patients, or how would patients find doctors that want to work with them?
You're putting your finger there on one of the biggest challenges that we have, because once you start listing all these doctors, the regulators want to get engaged, and they want to know about, are you building networks? And from a regulatory point of view, these are not easy areas to answer. But does the free market have the answer? Absolutely. You know, just like GoodRx has shown the man in the street at least a start towards how they can get something beginning to approach fair prices at the pharmacy. So there are growing numbers of things like Healthcare Blue Book. I don't think it's particularly good, but it's a great stepping stone to show people where things could be going. And in this information age, that information is available. And I fully believe that entrepreneurs will find a way to get that information where it can be easily searched, easily accessed, and easily responded to. But that doesn't exist yet, but anywhere we come across it, we try and make sure that our members are aware of it.
Right, very good, thank you. Okay, let's see. We have quite a number of questions here. So yeah, right. In my mind, networks are a bug, not a feature of our current system. I mean, a patient should be able to go to any doctor the patient chooses and should not be limited by their coverage to which doctors they see.
100% agree. And that's part of our principles within Sedera, is that people absolutely can go to the doctor of their own choice.
Right. So that is a really good benefit of the way you're doing things. So that one of the questions we had was, how many physicians are providing care in your system, and how do they get paid? Well, I guess any doctor could be in your system. Any doctor is in network.
Our answer to people is any doctor that accepts cash or credit card is already available to our members.
And then how does payment work? So does the patient generally pay directly when possible, and then the patient's reimbursed, or does Sedera get involved with paying the doctor? And how does that process
Okay,
look? What
now
does that look like
in
general?
essence, it's a great question and a very important question. And we know people are so used to the insurance system, they're used to the idea that there's no exchange of value at the time of seeing the physician. So we try and work with that within certain boundaries. We encourage people that they should handle their initial unshareable amount upfront. That's simple. And that they should then explain that they're a part of our community and that the community will be engaged with them in the payment process. Now, we don't directly pay the payer because we never want the money titled in our name. The money in the community belongs to the community. And part of transparency is knowing that we can't take that money. We don't take the money. What we do is we find ways to get it to the patient. And we do it in simple terms. If you think of everybody having their own account, we essentially have ways where from every account can come money to the person who needs it. Now, obviously, we found ways that we can technologically handle that on behalf of everybody. So it becomes someone having to receive, 150 different checks in the mail or something. No, they receive it as a payment, but without us ever having title to it.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for explaining that. And so there's a question I'm curious about too. Have any politicians or policymakers reached out to you to ask how they can help implement your policies on a wider basis, or for any other reasons? What's your experience with that?
There are a growing number of policymakers and politicians who have done exactly that. In fact, if you look at some of the tenets that President Trump has put out there as foundation stones, upon which he would like to see a Republican response to healthcare handled in his second term if he wins that. It includes instructions already given to the IRS, which are out there for public questioning on things like should payments to DPC doctors be able to be paid out of HSAs. And that same what they call rules period, the open comments on rules, also includes should these medical cost sharing approaches be free to be handled. So yes, at the highest levels, people are thinking about this, but we haven't actually seen final answers on any of those things yet.
Thank you. Yeah, and so AAPS did encourage people to submit comments on those questions, and right, it's been, from our standpoint, it's been a frustrating number of years trying to get these problems resolved, and it does look like maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel to some degree, but also from my standpoint, it looks like, anytime you ask the IRS to do something, there's possibilities of unintended consequences, and that they might do something that makes it worse or creates a new problem. Do you have any do you have any feelings you might be able to share on the current proposal from the IRS? And I mean, it started out as allowing HRAs to couple with sharing plans. I mean, and from my standpoint, I didn't think there were many. I just don't have a good sense of how many employers use HRAs and how that would help health sharing plans. Do you have any sense of how HRAs, if that is beneficial, and is that even being done right now, where HRAs might be coupled with a health sharing plan?
Okay, well, what you're describing is what's known in the industry as an ICHRA, an individual choice health reimbursement arrangement, slightly different from HSAs. Yeah, these are complex areas, and in terms of the existing healthcare sharing ministries, the ones exempted under the Affordable Care Act, they, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not necessarily an expert on it, but to the best of my knowledge, they do very little with companies, and the sort of level of sophistication necessary to handle an ICHRA is probably not something that they would choose to do. But the very fact that the ICHRA has enabled some of the things you're talking about, absolutely, because we work primarily with companies all over the country. We're very openly exploring and using those approaches for a growing number of groups. And I think, you know, even the clouds have a silver lining. So, you know, COVID, obviously, you know, a pandemic, you know, is a huge challenge, and it's been a terrible challenge at every level, not just medically to the country. But even that has brought some good things. You know, I think all of the opposition to telemedicine has effectively had to melt away. And, you know, all of the lawsuits and whether, you know, states were trying to make it insurance and all of this type of stuff to make it so difficult. It's like, forget it. That's ancient history. COVID has made that ancient history. And I think some of what we need to do is just demonstrably be so much better with the solutions we're offering that it sweeps away the opposition.
Very good point. And right, I think that is happening and growing, like you say. Okay, we have some more great questions here, and one of them is there are a couple related questions that we'll try to tick through here. One is about prior authorizations for things like IV nutritional therapy or chelation therapy, things that some might not consider mainstream medicine, but patients might find a value in them, and they may be helpful to patients. How do what some call alternative treatments work with Sedera?
Okay, again, a question like that is getting deep into the weeds, and is not easy for me to answer briefly. I think the first thing I would say is all of our guidelines are clearly out there on the web for anyone who wants to read through them. And so we've tried to be clear on any areas like this where people have very realistic reasons for needing and wanting to ask questions beforehand. We don't use a prior authorization approach for things. We try and steer well clear of anything that looks like it's a part of an insurance system. What we do try and teach, though, is responsible approaches from our members. And, you know, do gray areas crop up, and do people need help in those areas? Yes, they do. And we have what we call a community service board, which meets regularly and which seeks to answer any questions that are not adequately answered within the guidelines.
Right, understood. I think, right. For many things, I mean, the patient should be paying out of pocket and maybe shouldn't be seeking reimbursement from somebody else, because that complicates things and makes it more expensive. But right, there is a role for, right, especially for high cost, unexpected medical needs. But maybe not for you know, lower cost items. But so I guess on a related note, there's people are asking about CPAP, LASIK, bariatric surgery, annual wellness exams, annual eye exams. I guess all those are getting into the weeds too, and there's probably not a simple answer to those.
No, there is a simple answer. Most of those things that you mentioned can be really useful and are relatively low cost, and they fall under the initial unshareable amount. So we want people to take care of the oil changes. That keeps skin in the game. We're not
Right.
there to provide an expensive way of prepaying. If people want something that takes care of everything, there's a really good system out there that's already ripping people off. They should join it. Okay, but if they're willing to take personal responsibility, okay, so that they're not looking to shift their costs to other people for all the ordinary stuff, but are looking to have available a community of people who, like themselves, are committed to sharing in things that are getting unmanageable, that have gone beyond the ordinary, which is how we define our initial unshareable amount, then we're ideal for them. So our approach is not for everybody. That the person who's looking for the insurance card and handing everything to do with their health over to someone else is never going to be satisfied with our approach.
Right. So it's kind of, like you said, changing people's mindset and making them realize that expecting someone to cover everything only limits their choices and makes it more expensive in the long run.
It absolutely does. And it's incredibly important that we stop being afraid of the issue of personal responsibility. Because if we won't take care of ourselves, we're even less likely to take care of the community we're a part of. And everything one sees about these socialized approaches is that, oh, well, once I've taken care of my bit, then the community takes care of everything else. And what people are saying is, now I don't need to be responsible. No, we always need to be responsible. And so that's part of what we're inculcating in the community that we're a part of, that honestly, if we for you are a cheaper way of having insurance, and I put that in quotes, then you've not understood at all what we're trying to do, and you're probably not going to be happy with us.
Good point. Okay, so here's another interesting question. Medicare patients, if someone's eligible for Medicare, do they have an option for partnering with you?
Okay, we do have people who have Medicare who also choose to be with us, but we're not designed to be, let's call it a Medi-Yap. We're not designed that way. And I tell anybody who asks me whether I think it's a good idea, I tell them, well, it all depends what you're trying to do. If you just love the whole system and approach, and you want to remain a part of the community, we'll let you. We do expect you to use Medicare for what you're qualified for, so that those needs don't fall on the community. You've already prepaid for that through all your years of paying in your taxes. So we don't pretend to be any sort of a substitute or even an adjunct to. But if you love the community and you're thinking there may be gaps that will fit in, that will help me, and I certainly am quite happy for my money to go, while I'm well and have it to people in the community who need it. We wouldn't tell a person they're not allowed to be with us. So I'm of Medicare age. I automatically receive Medicare as someone who's paid into the system, but I'm also a Sedera member. But the two really have no relationship to each other. So if I have a medical need and it's eligible under Medicare, I'm going to submit it to Medicare.
Do you know offhand, do you have any Medicare eligible members who choose not to, join Medicare Part B, for instance, but be a Sedera member?
I wouldn't know the answer. I have no idea, because those are individual choices that people make.
You wouldn't prohibit someone from joining in that scenario, as far as you know.
As far as I know, we would not. But we would say, hey, if you're eligible for Medicare and you've paid for it, you need to have it.
Okay, let's see. We have, right. So, someone just brought up in the Q&A box, well, one of President Trump's executive orders is to let people not participate in Medicare Part A and keep their Social Security. There are some people out there who would like to have the option of having other coverage, an alternative to Medicare Part A. But, there's the situation right now is because of a rule change during the Clinton administration, those people also forfeit their Social Security benefits. And so they're sort of trapped into, it makes it much less likely that they would give up Part A. So someone in the chat room brought that up, that wrinkle up.
No, I'm no expert in these areas, Jeremy.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't make sense that someone who's paid for something then throws it away. But maybe some people have very strong beliefs on whether they'll take anything from the government. But if that were the case, why would they take Social Security and not Medicare?
Yeah, right. No, those are good questions. I think, right, some people, right, you've paid into Part A, but they have philosophical objections to it, or they don't want to be stuck with whatever Part A decides they'll get, which, right now it's Part A, I think might be pretty good coverage, but in some regards, but as Part A becomes, Part A is on an unsustainable path right now, and it's going to go bankrupt. So they don't want to get stuck in a bankrupt system.
Well, what would be wonderful, but we don't live in utopia. Right. We live in the real world. Would be if they would just give the money back to the people who paid it in and said, "Hey, 2 years from now, you're going to be on your own anyway," or maybe.
Yeah. So that's something that we've suggested is you let people be bought out of the obligation. So. Right, there are some creative solutions. We're not going to solve that tonight.
No, we're not.
Okay, thank you for entertaining those questions. And we're getting pretty close to the end here. Someone asked about our cost sharing payments. What's the current tax treatment of cost sharing payments? I think, well, that's one of the things the IRS rule is, says that they will be considered tax deductible. I think that's one of the things the proposed rule does.
Yes, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but in essence, that's right. The case. The trouble is it also raises all sorts of other questions, meaning are they going to say using exactly the same terminology as the Affordable Care Act? Because that is part of what had all these restrictions. Right. Only had it available to people of faith. That had to be in something before 1999. And so all of a sudden, so part of our argument, and probably yours as well, before the IRS is, please don't just lift the language out of the ACA, which is, perhaps it's already been rendered toothless by removing the tax. It may end up getting ruled unconstitutional. Let's tie it to something just rational and say, yeah, any of these medical cost sharing arrangements would be able to use it. And that would be a sensible approach.
Okay. Wow, we've really covered quite a broad spectrum of questions tonight. And Dr. Dale, really appreciate you sticking on here and answering them and participating in this discussion. I see Dr. Emmons is back here. Dr. Emmons, would you like to help us wrap up here? Oop. Let's see, Dr. Emmons, could you click on mute there? It looks like we can't hear you. There we go.
There, I'm back on. So thank you, Tony, Dr. Dale, for a great presentation. And for those of us that are in full-time clinical practice, we think about these issues a lot, and yet you've certainly managed to show us some things about it that we probably weren't thinking about. And even if we're practicing clinically every day and we're not planning to go into areas of administration, it's still important as you're practicing clinically to understand this at this level. So thank you for a very stimulating conversation. Thank you to the participants for being here once again. We're glad you're here, and we're going to keep going forward with this webinar series. So we'll look forward to seeing you again. And thank you again, Jeremy, for all you do for the webinar series. And you'll let everybody know again a little bit about the logistics as we sign off. So good night, all.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Emmons. And yeah, just one very brief final housekeeping announcement. Like I mentioned at the beginning, in about 30 minutes, you'll be getting an email. And one of the important things in the email is a link to fill out the post-event evaluation. Just a few brief questions in that. Fill it out for us and you'll get a link to download the CME certificate. And as always, if you have any trouble with that, just shoot me an email or a text message and let me know, and we'll get that squared away. And we will be meeting again in 2 weeks, and keep your eye out for an email invitation for our next webinar. Next Thursday, we will be having our Doctors Are In group discussions. So if you're not signed up for those and you would like to be, just reply to the post-event email to let me know, and we'll make sure you get an invite to our group discussions next week, next Thursday. And so with that, I'll just thank our speaker again. Tony, thank you, sir, for all you're doing for patients and doctors across the country. Dr. Emmons, and thank you again. And to all our participants, an honor to have every single one of you with us here. And I know all of you, almost all of you, I would say all of you are working in the same direction and to help patients and the profession and our country. So with that, from all of us at AAPS, I'll wish you a good evening and see you next time. Good night.